Good evening. I'm Matthew Jaffe. I'm the Interim Executive Director here at the Institute of Politics. Tonight we are honored to welcome Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe and former South Carolina Governor Jim Hodges to the International House. Before we get started, I wanted to plug an upcoming IOP event. Next Monday, November 6th, we will be welcoming Cardinal Blaise Cupich for an event starting at 12 noon. You can register for that event and for other IOP events at politics.uchicago.edu. A couple housekeeping notes before we start tonight. During the second half of this event, we will take questions from the audience, and as always, we will give priority to student questions. So the first 3 questions tonight will come from our students in the audience. Finally, please make sure right now that your cell phones are on silent, appropriately. Now, here to formally introduce our speakers tonight is Richard Omoniyi Shoyola. Richard is a third year from St. Louis, and he is a Fellows Ambassador for our moderator tonight, IOP Fellow Bakari Sellers. Please join me right now in welcoming Richard to the podium.
Thank you so much. We live in very turbulent times. Everyday Americans are concerned with the open expressions of bigotry in places like Charlottesville, Virginia, and are vocalizing the public's need to contend, the responsibility to understand, and the duty to resist. Many also champion the importance of acknowledging past legacies of oppression in order to promote a better and more inclusive future. As discourse is essential for a robust democracy, we hope tonight to engage with challenging ideas and narratives in order to promote a better understanding of how we can move forward together. To further these discussions, we welcome Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe and former South Carolina Governor Jim Hodges for a conversation with former South Carolina Representative Bakari Sellers on their time as Democratic governors in southern states. Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe is a former DNC chairman who fought to expand public access to health care and restored voting rights to 13,000 ex-felons. Under his tenure, the Virginia unemployment rate declined from 5.4% in January to 3.7% today. His strong positions have also lent themselves to his alligator wrestling. We also welcome former South Carolina Governor Jim Hodges, who during his tenure formally instituted Martin Luther King Jr. Day as a state holiday, fought for an improved South Carolina school system with a $1.1 billion school construction initiative and implemented programs for early childhood education. Our moderator is Bakari Sellers, a son of the civil rights movement with a tireless commitment to public service. He's currently serving as a Pritzker Fellow with the Institute of Politics, hosting weekly seminars on modern progressivism and the path forward for the Democratic Party. His free podcast, Viewpoint, is available on iTunes and has included guests such as Hillary Clinton, Charlemagne the God, and Mark Cuban. Without further ado, we hope you all enjoy the event, and thank you all for being with us.
Thank you, Richard, for that. Can everybody hear me? Thumbs up in the back. Thank you, Richard, for that awesome introduction. As he said, my name is Bakari Sellers, and I am extremely grateful to be here at the University of Chicago with 2 of my very good friends here, Governors Jim Hodges and Governors Terry McAuliffe. We get a chance today to have an interesting discussion, which parallels some of the things that I've been able to talk about at the Institute of Politics, which is progressivism in the South, this current state of the Democratic Party, which many of us think on a national level is, I guess the politically correct word would be in shambles. And I wanted you all to be able to see 2 Democrats who had progressive Democratic messages who actually won races in the South. Just to start, I want to talk about the composition or ideology of the South. And do you governors think that that's changing? Has that changed since you've been elected? And has that changed since you won in 2013?
Well, thanks. First of all, thanks to the University of Chicago and to be here with Bakari Sellers, one of my great friends, and Terry McAuliffe. Terry and I have worked together since the mid-'90s when he became chair of the Democratic National Committee. So we've known each other a long time. The South has, I think the complexion of the electorate has changed a great deal. I look back to my race in '98, and I believed then, because we had lost a number of elections, I think 4 in a row at that time, and I believed then that the way to win elections for a Democrat was for the election to be about an issue rather than about an ideology or a party. And I firmly believe, Bakari, that on election day, if people thought they were voting for either me or for the lottery in that case, for educational improvement, that I would win. But if they were voting for a Democrat or a Republican, I'd get my ass kicked. I can't think of any other way to describe it. And I think part of the problem we have had since the late 90s is that we have fallen into this trap of letting it be about ideology, at least in the Deep South. And the elections have been about whether you're a Democrat or Republican, and Republicans have run cookie-cutter elections. We have sort of fallen into that trap too, and not tried to take chances. So I think the electorate has changed some. You could put together a coalition of African-American voters and generally white, non-college educated voters, particularly women, in the late 90s in the Deep South, and still scratch out a win. Harder in places like South Carolina and Alabama with lower levels of college education than it was in some other states, but you still could scratch that out. And I think what's changed the most is that now something like 2 in 10 white voters in a place like South Carolina will vote for a Democrat, and 8 in 10 will vote for a Republican. You can't win elections like that. So the dynamics of states that have lower levels of college education have changed a lot over the past 20 years, and that, I think, marks the challenge for Democrats in the Deep South states. Is how you deal with those sort of hardcore feelings about Democratic candidates and Republican candidates. I think it gets back to having to make the election about an idea or a couple of ideas rather than about a party.
Your election was about an idea, but that was jobs, something you've done extremely well. And to piggyback on Governor Hodges, when I ran just recently in 2014, I had to get 2.8 out of every 10 white voters in order for me to get the 50% plus 1. I got a resounding 18%. So I was a little bit short, and I ran what I thought to be a progressive race as well. So how did you thread that needle in 2013, and what made you successful? And footnote, you actually did not have a drop-off of African-American voters from 2012 in Barack Obama's race to 2013 in yours.
First time that happened, I got the same amount of African-American votes that President Obama got, which
in
was
an off year.
In an off year. Never happened before, from a presidential to an off year. But listen, Virginia's changing. We used to be a ruby red state. We are now a purple state trending blue. In a presidential year, I think we're now a blue state. President Obama won it in 2008, first Democrat to win the state since 1964. Think of that. He won again in 12, and Hillary Clinton is the only southern state that she carried was Virginia. So we're making dramatic progress. When I ran for governor, and I've always said Democrats got to run on the values they care about. Too many politicians today put their finger up in the air. They think they say what people want to hear. I ran a campaign and said I'm going to do what I think is right. If I don't win, I don't win. My life's not going to change. So remember, we were the capital of the Confederacy. We were a southern state. But when I ran for governor, I made it all about economic development, all about jobs. But I said in order to get jobs, you have to be open and welcoming to everybody. So I was the first, believe it or not, statewide official in the entire South to come out for marriage equality. That was a tough deal in 2013 in the Commonwealth of Virginia. We are the home of the NRA. I told the NRA to go jump off a cliff. I got an F rating from them, and I said I'm proud of it. Now, I'm a gun owner. I hunt. But everybody ought to go through a background check. And I was very insistent and laid that out when I ran for governor. And I told women I would be a brick wall to protect their rights. And I have been a strident brick wall. And I ended up running on that all around jobs. And I ended up getting more votes than any Democrat ever running for governor in the history of the Commonwealth of Virginia. Lean in on the values that you care about. Run on a campaign. Don't worry about whether you're going to win or lose. Go down swinging for what you believe in. And I think voters respect that, and they respect someone who's willing to stand up and take a very controversial, different stance than traditionally. No Virginia Democrat had ever done that before running statewide. And in fact, it got to the point that the mayor of Virginia Beach, the biggest city in Virginia, Republican, I'm the only Democrat he ever endorsed. Ends up most of the Republican business people endorsed me for governor because they said, you know what, the guy's out there fighting, he's swinging, and I think he'll create jobs. And I will have my replacement chosen in a week. And I think Virginia will sweep next week. I think all 3 statewide are going to Democrats. We're up in the polls. Why? Because we've delivered results, and that's what people want to hear.
So let's just piggyback on that a little bit, because I know people want to talk about 2020, and we'll get to that with Governor Hodges briefly, or 2018. But 2017 is the most important thing we have for Democrats, because we have not only New Jersey, but we have Virginia. And I know that you're a Democrat, you're outgoing, you have a 56% approval rating. One thing you never want to do is mess up an elected official's approval rating. 56, right?
56,
that's where we are?
yeah,
okay.
that's good. Yeah. Trump's at 31, I should tell you, in Virginia.
That's all good to know.
Yeah.
So what does the landscape look like? And you've been a great predictor. You said we would win
Yep.
the presidency in Virginia with 210,000. What happens next Tuesday?
Yep. So here's where in Virginia, it is the most important elections going on. We feel very good about New Jersey. Our candidate there is running against Chris Christie's lieutenant governor. So,
Chris Christie's anything.
and he came out today, he hit 13% in the polls today. So I think
He's
we're
up, huh?
He's up. 13. Yeah, he has reached rock bottom.
You're saying
but
there's
in
hope.
Virginia, people are happy. State's doing well. We've taken unemployment from 5.4 to 3.7 in 4 years. It's now the second lowest of any major state in the United States of America. We've created more jobs, more economic activity than at any time in our state's history. Our unemployment claims just hit a 43-year low the other day. So a great environment to be running in, Bakari. In addition, you've got the Trump factor in Virginia. Trump's at a 31% approval rating. Everything he has done has hurt Virginia. I've personally told the president his travel ban is a disgrace. You know, I went out to Dulles Airport when he put it in. They had 5 people at the airport. I was tipped off, 5 people, 3 hours held in a room in Virginia at Dulles International Airport. I went there. I said, I'm the governor of this state. Those are Virginia residents. This airport is in my state. And they did not have access to legal counsel. I demanded, I said, I'm not leaving here until they get access to legal counsel. They got the legal counsel. We got him released. But his immigration policy has been horrible. His trade policy has been horrible. So is a great time to be running. I would predict, remember this, we sweep all 3 statewide, and I think we pick up anywhere from 4 to 8 seats in our House of Delegates. And the Republican is a former chair of the Republican Party, Ed Gillespie, who's run the most racist, hateful, bigoted campaign I've ever seen. He is running ads attacking Ralph Northam, my lieutenant governor, on he wants to bring sanctuary cities to Virginia, and he's got these folks, this gang, and horrible dark pictures. We don't have sanctuary cities, folks, in Virginia. They're not allowed by law. And also he attacks me on my restorational rights. I've restored more rights now than any governor in the history of America. 170,000 rights restored. 40 states it was automatic. I made us the 41st state. So lean in. I told Ed, buy more ads. But people are going to reject his negativity, and they're going to go with what you're going to get: good, progressive, pro-economic results when you get a Democrat. When you elect a Democrat, good things happen.
You actually beat an incumbent.
Yeah,
that's a good.
Yeah.
You actually beat an incumbent. And so when you see Donald Trump, by the way, you've seen, I know that we've had Jason Kander come over to the Institute of Politics, and we've had other people talk about great political ads. One of the greatest political ads of all time was run by Governor Jim Hodges. It's the Bubba ad. It is a legendary ad. I'll let anybody ask a question about that ad when that time comes. I wish I would have thought about it sooner. But you've run a campaign against an incumbent and beat him. So what does it look like for somebody as we get to 2020 to beat Donald Trump, which is probably an unfair question because it's something we've never seen before. But what does a Democrat have to do to even get to that point?
Well, he's helping a lot, I think, which is what's really important. I think for the Democratic Party, one thing that we really need to do is we need to focus on all the things that I think are wrong with the country now under Donald Trump. Terry McAuliffe has mentioned a number of them. But I think also to pivot and talk about our vision for the country. Sometimes we don't talk enough about the positive things that I think we can do to try to make America stronger. My hope is that candidates will focus, Governor, on economic messages. I think that's a unifying message. And my own view is that Democratic candidates nationally do better when we talk about kitchen table issues. I know in the South it makes it much easier for candidates to run when we're talking about the sort of things that families talk about: better education for their kids, strengthening Social Security, good jobs in every corner of the country. All the sort of things that look toward the future, I think, are critically important. And to have that sort of message, I think is important. But the other piece is we really have, I'm going to be critical of us as Democrats in saying that we really have lost our way in communicating with blue-collar white voters, whether it's in the Midwest or the Northeast or the South. We've stopped doing it. And I don't know what's happened and why we have, but we've, it used to be that we focused on relentlessly on those economic messages. It meant a lot to voters, but we've sort of lost our way, I think, over the last 15 or 20 years, and we need to get back to doing that. And there may not be a lot of great political reasons if people talk about, now that we talk about different voting groups that vote for Democrats and those that won't, but there are a lot of good reasons for the country, and we're seeing that in Donald Trump right now, that sometimes you don't have a lot of great political reasons to be reaching out to a group, but there are a hell of a lot of good reasons to make America stronger, to really make America stronger, to have a message that resonates with all corners of America and with everybody. And I do think we've lost that, and if we're going to be successful, we're going to need to get back to trying to have something that is more broadly appealing to all Americans, frankly, even some that won't vote for us.
And we had this conversation earlier on the podcast that comes out, a shameless plug later today, first thing in the morning, Governor McAuliffe. And, I firmly believe that there's somewhat of a myth that the media has portrayed of these economic anxiety voters, and we won't delve into that too much. I think there was a great deal of cultural anxiety, and I think Hillary Clinton paid the price for coming after the first African-American president. But with that being said, to couple what Governor Hodges said, you actually were able to thread the needle, because you talked about these issues of quote-unquote identity politics, but you also talked about these universal issues of the economy. How were you able to do that in 2013? Is Ralph doing that now, and will we have somebody to do that in 2020?
And he is. Well, the good news is now in Virginia, we have 4 years of, as I say, with record jobs, record economic investment. So there's a great predicate there going forward. But what I've been able to do, which has been effective, and listen, we're an old southern state, and Jim knows well that you got a lot of old prejudices out there you got to get through. But what I've been able to convince folks on a very socially progressive, I'm probably by far the most progressive governor in Virginia history with the stands I've taken. But folks, you can't bring Amazon or Google or Facebook or Microsoft or Salesforce. They will not come to a state that discriminates. They're not going to do it. I just got Facebook last month, $1 billion investment in Virginia. And people now understand when you want to build that new economy of 21st century technologies, you got to be open and welcoming to everyone. And we've got to lean in. And I've tried to help my rural communities.
You said lean in 5 times. What does that mean?
I don't think Democrats are tough enough. I don't think they fight enough. I come from the school, you punch me, I'm going to punch you back twice as hard. I apologize. You watch every day on television what they do on the other side. Look at Fox. For the last week, they knew this stuff was coming, so they're talking about some uranium deal. Folks, the uranium can't be taken out of America, but you would think they literally are taking, the Clintons literally picked up buckets of uranium, took it to Russia, and then handed it over to the North Korea dictator. Honestly, if you watch Fox TV. But they're very good on that side. We got to get tougher, and we need more Democrats to stand up and fight. Here's what we stand for. Here are the results that you get. And I've really leaned in on my rural communities. They've seen their unemployment drop dramatically, every county in Virginia. But, we're an old coal state. And you heard a lot about coal with Donald Trump in the election. I'm going to bring back coal jobs. He's not bringing back coal jobs, folks. And it's nothing to do with Barack Obama or Donald Trump. The cost of natural gas has replaced it. Virginia is a coal state. We have 8.5 million people who live in Virginia, 4.2 million workers. Karen, out of 4.2 million, how many think you work in the coal business? Take a guess.
24,000.
24,000. You're copying his paper.
Are we close?
1,716.
We were high.
Think about what I just told you. But all of this stuff and the culture issues about coal. I've got less than 2,000 coal jobs in Virginia out of a population of 8.5 million. I have 77,000 renewable energy efficiency jobs I've created in the last 3 years. So what I've tried to do is go into the communities. I can replace these jobs. I can put you in high-paying jobs that are better for the environment, better for your own environment. And that's what we have to do as Democrats. We just got to bust through all that bringing those new jobs. That's how you get results.
With the emergence of Donald Trump, you've also seen so many different voices that have been raised. I mean, you have, in the Democratic Party, you have Black Lives Matter. You have the Women's March. They just had their convention this past weekend. I believe there were 4,000 people there. Speaking of Karen again, there's an amazing Washington Post article that just was posted about this. You have all of this energy. What does the Democratic Party have to do? And, you know, Bernie Sanders drove millions upon millions of young and working class. I truly believe if the race, this is just my opinion, if the race was between Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden, that the Democratic Party may have missed that populism that was running rampant in the United States of America, that Bernie Sanders was able to kind of coddle and bring to the forefront. What does the Democratic Party do with all of this energy? You were former chair of the DNC. What does Tom Perez do? And you've won, and you've been in the DNC forever and always. What do we do with all of this energy? How do we make this and breed results in November?
You go first.
First of all, we as a party got to, as I say, it goes back to the values we believe in, fight on the things that we believe in. Number two, we as a party got to stay unified. You know, we're not all going to agree on all the issues. We don't. You know, I'm not for the litmus test that people are trying to put on different folks.
Yeah.
Because what you may want to run on in South Carolina may be different than I'm going to run on in Virginia, or you may run in New York and other places. Let's get Democrats elected. But sometimes we splinter up the party. We've got to work together. What is our goal? What does everybody want from elected officials? They want a good paying job. They want their kids to have a job. They want a great quality education for their children. They want to be able to get in their car and be able to not spend 2 hours going to see their kids play a ball game, and a great health care system. That's what they want. And as we as Democrats ought to focus on those core key issues and deliver on those, then we will be successful. But Trump unleashed, Trump has lied to us over and over and over again. And we need to realize that we're up with someone who will consistently lie. You got to punch back, and you got to punch back hard. He told us he'd create jobs. He hasn't created jobs. Last month is the first month in 7 years that we lost jobs. Think of that. Did you know that? You should. And guess what? In the month of September, when we lost jobs the first time in 7 years, guess how many days he played golf? 9. He ought to be accountable for this.
Well, I agree with what the governor said, but I think we just need to remind voters of what lack of unity, Democratic voters and independent voters, what lack of unity has done to us, whether it's on women's rights or whether it's with LGBT issues or whether it's on a whole range of issues that we've got. All of these things happened as a result of independent and Democratic voters not being passionate enough and not being unified enough. So, I think we're off to a pretty good start, despite the fact that we've got 20 or 30 different voices out there who want to lead the Democratic Party and lead the ticket. The fact of the matter is we can point toward things, Bakari, that are being done now that we think are inconsistent with the values of the country that we want to live in. And I think pointing toward those things and saying this is really what's at stake, if you care about Daca or a whole host of other issues, if you don't get out there and vote, look what happens. I think he's doing a pretty good job of helping unify those 65 or 66 or 68% that aren't for Donald Trump. He's doing a pretty good job of that, and our task is to channel that energy and have it move in a positive direction. But my concern is that looking at the past 10 or 15 years is what do we do with it when we win it, which I think we will. What are we going to do positive? And I think we need to send a pretty clear message that we have broad interests, that it isn't just Democratic constituencies that we care about, that we've got a vision for the country as a whole. Otherwise, we get right back into the soup here, where we've got the problems of people feeling alienated that didn't vote for our Democratic candidate. And that's what troubles me the most, is our inability to get beyond elections and move on to trying to govern in a way that's productive for the country.
I want to get to governing in a Republican state with Republican legislatures, or very close legislatures, because both of you all had to do that. But before I get to that point, it's a very young room. And the Democratic Party, with Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, Jim Clyburn, Bernie Sanders, our beloved Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, Chuck Schumer. Who else am I missing that's in the 70 and older club? Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren is close to it. 9 of our de facto leaders are 70 and above. And so you have a room full of millennials. My question to the Democratic Party is, or to you two, is how do we bring all of this energy in and allow them to be leaders in the party and also help dictate the message and the future of the party?
First, I think we got to actively recruit young folks to run for office.
Justin Fairfax, running for lieutenant governor in the great state of Virginia.
In Virginia, young and dynamic. He will be, I think, a trend for our country of getting people to run for office. We just need more people to step up to the plate. And it's hard, I'll be honest with you, because of the problem we have in America today with these redistricted seats. It's hard to win these general elections because politicians, pick their voters instead of the other way around. We've got to have, and I'm working very closely with President Obama and Eric Holder on this new national Democratic redistricting, trying to get fair lines all over the country. And I understand young people's frustrations because, 2 years ago in Virginia, we had all 140 House of Delegates up. I think we had 84 seats that were uncontested.
Yeah.
Because you can't win. So we got to get fair lines. I think young people love to run for office, but they got a lot going on and they're not going to do it if they don't have a shot of winning. So I think fundamentally, and this is a huge project long term, but I got to tell you folks, we got to, I was asked earlier by Bakari about the future, and I said our biggest future is 2018 with these 36 governors up, because today Republicans control 70% of the chambers that will draw lines in 2021, 70%. And they are going to draw lines to have more Republican members of Congress and more members in the State House. And the challenges for people today in this country, Congress gets nothing done. It's all happening at the states. The rollback of individual rights and environmental rights and restrictions on voting issues, it's all happening at the states. I just vetoed a bill that in order to get an absentee ballot in Virginia, you have to fax in your driver's license. Folks, it passed. If Republican governor were in Virginia, that would be law of the land in Virginia. So this is what's happening. So we got to deal with the redistricting to get young people actually energized. I'm still sick that 92 million people didn't vote in the last election. I have zero tolerance, folks, to be honest with you, for people not voting. We always say people fought and died for the right to vote. They did. And you sit here with John Lewis or some other people who have gone through the challenges that we've gone through in this country, the men and women who have fought. I have a son today who's a Marine in a very difficult part of the world fighting today. Men and women are wearing the cloth of this country to give us our freedoms. The least we can do is vote. And, I happen to be, I'll throw it out there also, I'm also for some compulsory community service or something. I think everybody ought to give back to the country.
Governor?
I think we need to get 500,000 young people to move to the Dakotas and take over both those states.
Take over both the Dakotas? That's a start.
Well, you could be U.S. Senator there in a second if you did that. I think, what better opportunity? You think about it. I would much rather, if I were in your shoes and you're a millennial that wants to run for office, would you rather be part of a party that has 80-year-old leaders or one that has 45-year-old leaders? I'd want to be part of the one that has 80-year-old leaders because they're going to die at some point and you're going to have a chance to take over.
Governor Hodges is no longer elected. I just want you
a pragmatic way of looking at it.
He's very pragmatic here.
But seriously, I'm half joking, but the truth is that when you have leaders who served the party very well for a lengthy period of time, at some point they are going to be moving from the scene. It's a little harder when you got Paul Ryan there at age 50. Who probably plans to be there a long time. It creates generational opportunities for a new group to come in, and we might have a Macron on our hands in the United States and among the Democrats. So I think I would view that as an opportunity rather than as a detriment, Bakari, because there is going to be a generational change soon, and that's going to create opportunities for bright, young, progressive and aggressive candidates who have good ideas, and I think people will be open to them.
One of my last two questions before we take questions from the audience: how many people are majored in political science or public policy? Okay, so this question is not as sexy, but this question is for that group right there. Talk to me about governing in the South, where you have Republican legislatures or very close majority-minority, and you have very conservative Democrats. So how did that look? I know you tried to get Medicaid expanded in Virginia, and we are very thankful for those efforts. And you actually got us a King holiday and some other things in South Carolina. And he was governor in 1998, and we're talking about King holiday, some 40 years after Dr. King was assassinated. So he was helping us catch up to the rest of the Union. Yeah. So both of you guys, just share with us a few stories and anecdotes, and then how are you successful governing in the South?
Well, both of my chambers are Republican. My House chamber, the House of Delegates, is very Republican. There are 66 out of 100, so there's only 34 Democrats. Very Tea Party. But I was able to convince them, as I said earlier, about jobs, economic development, and I got in and really created a lot of jobs. As I say, I'm the most traveled governor in America. I've been on 34 trade missions around the world. I've brought a lot of jobs, $91 billion of ag and forestry sales last year. So the Republicans actually worked very closely with me. I had very good success on economic development, on education. We put $1 billion into education, and it was the largest investment in K-12 in the history. On transportation, we reformed transportation in Virginia. So on those issues, Bakari, we had a great working relationship, give and take. On social issues, obviously diametrically opposed. I own the record for having vetoed the most bills of any governor in Virginia history. I vetoed 120 bills, the most anti-women.
That was one budget session for Jim Hodges, though.
How many did you veto overall?
Yeah, I think I had one veto overturned my whole time in office, so probably 40 or so.
Yeah, I had 120. But anti-women, anti-gay, anti-environment, pro-gun, anti-voting rights. So 120, most ever. And I'm very proud of my Democrats, because you're right. So 66 Republicans, if they get one vote, 67, I get overridden. I never lost one Democrat in 4 years. I was 120 to 0. So I was able to hold my coalition of even rural Democrats together to support the governor on this effort, because it's a great, important talking point for Ralph Northam. Eddie Gillespie will sign those bills. Ralph will veto those bills. So, you know, it's very, but the sad part is Medicaid expansion. So I've tried for 4 years like a dog to get it done. We have lost $10.5 billion in Virginia, $10.5 billion, $2.2 billion a year, 6.6 million a day, that I could get health care for 400,000 Virginians. We have paid for it. You get 100% of your money back. My legislature won't do it, plain and simple. They come to me in the dark of night and say, Governor, I'd vote for it tomorrow, but if I do, I will lose my Tea Party primary, and they'll lose their job. And they're not going to give up their job to get Medicaid expansion done, and it is very sad, because these rural communities where they need it the most, where these Republicans are from, on opiate addiction, on mental health, where I need money, they are forfeiting it because they're scared to death of the Tea Party. And I have publicly called them out over and over, and that's what we got to change.
Your governorship had a great deal of social issues that you dealt with. The gaming issues, the Confederate flag. How did you deal with that governing in your?
Yeah. Well, a lot of those issues were appealing to Republicans. So I think that was one of the secrets of my success was in the election, was that right after the election, our playbook was preschool education, trying to expand access to preschool education, an education lottery that paid for college scholarships for deserving South Carolina kids, teacher pay increases, billions of dollars in spending for new public schools in every part of the state, prescription drug program. Before Bush did one, we had a senior prescription drug program for less affluent seniors. So we had all those things, which I thought it was really difficult for Republicans to be opposed to all those things. Some of them were, but we pretty much steamrolled them in the first year and a half, with the first 2 years with those issues. And yeah, we did have some. We had the lottery was divisive. We had a video gaming issue that was divisive, but we were able to get a good majorities in the legislature to pass both those measures and move forward with them, because there was interest on both sides of the aisle, and there was interest among the Republican and Democratic and independent electorate in getting things done. And now it was harder when we dealt with taking the Confederate flag off the dome, and the King holiday was a little less. The timing was good because we dealt with the flag issue, and I brought the King holiday up shortly after that, betting that the Republicans wouldn't have the nerve to be opposed to it, and I was right on that. They weren't. Yeah, some, but it was a little easier than dealing with the flag issue was. So I think that some of it, Bakari, I think is having a plan like Governor McAuliffe did, having a playbook on how you're going to go about getting these things passed, and being relentless in and working on those when you felt like you had the opportunity to do it, which for me was the first 2 years. I knew that I'd have a good opportunity then because of the dynamics of what was going on in the state.
So two minor issues. He talked about bringing the Confederate flag down, and many of you all, it's a wrong thought, believe that Nikki Haley took the Confederate flag down in South Carolina. Actually, Governor Hodges took the flag down off the dome of the State House. The flag used to fly. It was the American flag, South Carolina flag, and Confederate flag that waved above the South Carolina dome. And we, in an amazing compromise and true governance and public policy, had an African-American monument, and the flag came down to the front of the State House, where 9 people subsequently died, and Nikki Haley got credit for taking the flag down. I want to turn to you before we take questions, because you've dealt with this issue in South Carolina recently. I just alluded to the Mother Emanuel massacre that we had. You had the death of Heather Heyer, along with 2 of your military law enforcement individuals as well. And you just had a really, really deplorable, and I use that word consciously, scene in Charlottesville on that day. Tell me, I appreciated you, and I think that you rose to the top tier or one of the top tiers in anything that you want to do in your future from the way that you handled that time frame. Tell me about that time, how you feel, how you handled it, and why you were a shining star in that moment.
Well, we prepared for it. We knew all these folks were going to come into Charlottesville. We had had regular briefings from the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security. They were being told to bring arms and to hurt people. We had conveyed that on to the city of Charlottesville. And so when the day occurred, you know, the rally was supposed to come from noon to 5, but by 11 o'clock just going in, at that point I had told the state police that they need to clear the park. We were not going to let them. It was just getting out of control. And it was alt-right, neo-Nazis, and white supremacists. The most vile people I've ever seen. They're wearing swastikas, T-shirts with Adolf Hitler's picture on it, walking in front of the synagogue saying you all should have been incinerated, like we did to the folks in World War II. The language they use towards members of the African American community. This is not a country that I recognized that day, to be honest with you folks. The hatred, I mean, people used to have to wear hoods to hide what they were doing. They don't even feel they need to wear hoods anymore. So we got the park cleared and all that. I had talked to President Bush, President Trump, and I've said this publicly. I told the president these were very horrible people that had come into our state from out of state, very vile individuals, and told him what he needed to do. But then he went and did his press conference, unfortunately, and didn't attack the 3 groups. He attacked both sides. Folks, there was no, the folks on the other sides were coming to protest against hatred. That's what they were coming on the other side. This was not both sides' fault. So, you know, he did what he had, and I knew at that point what I had to do. And it was very hard for me because I knew I was not only speaking to Charlottesville and Virginia and the U.S., but I knew I had to give a message to the globe that here's who we really are here in America. This is not who we are. And just as I walked on stage, it was really hard because I had been informed that minutes before that one of the state troopers who was on my personal security detail was killed in the helicopter crash, and my pilot for 3.5 years had been killed. So it was really tough, but I just said I knew I had to go out and do what I had to say, and I told these folks to go home. I said right off the bat, they're not wanted in our state, and they're not wanted in our country. And I said they all parade around here like they are patriots. They weren't patriots. They are cowards. And these vile people need to be called out for who they are. And nobody should second guess it, and nobody should be afraid to call out this injustice that I saw. And more people need to do it.
We're thankful for that. So we have some questions here. I'm told that the first 3 questions are for students. They all look like they're students. But because all 3 of us are from the South, we're going to do your question first, and then we're going to let these, I see we have 2 ladies in line as well. We're going to let them come up and ask their questions, and then we'll get to the rest of the long line of men that have bogarted the microphone.
Hi, my name is Matt Enlow, and I'm a 3rd-year student here at the law school. I'm glad you all brought up the issue of different messages for different ideological wings. I have a lot of friends in the South who find it hard to communicate with their conservative coworkers and classmates because they watch different news, get different information, and just don't believe some factually true things being reported by the media, large corporations and small organizations alike. I know that some folks, like those who invaded Charlottesville, are beyond reaching, but for the rest, how do we bridge the gap and get back on the same level so we can have serious conversations about how to live together?
Start by not talking down to them. The two of us come from small towns in South Carolina, and I will say the one thing that disturbs me about some of my Democratic friends is the sort of giggly nature in which they talk down to these people. Now, I didn't learn a lot in elections, but I've sort of learned calling somebody stupid is not a way to get them on your side the next time, and I think we do a little too much of that. And so, I mean, I think trying to understand, we need to do a better job of understanding what, even if we disagree with them, trying to understand what it is that motivates them. If you go to a lot of small towns in the South, you'll see some places that are pretty depressing. You know, they've lost whatever industry they have. The best and the brightest have left to go other places. There's not a whole lot of hope. And you begin to sort of understand their frustration about where life is. Now, Democrats shouldn't be blamed for that, but you begin to get it. I think we need to do a better job of trying to understand what it is that's getting at them. Now, if it's an issue of race, there's not a whole lot we can do about trying to understand that. But if there's economic anxiety out there, we can, and we need to stop making fun of them and start trying to understand what it is that drives them and trying to have real communication. I mean, some of these are relatives of mine, and believe me, it's frustrating to hear some of the things that they say and they think, but I think we need to do a better job of that. And that's part of why I think we've run into problems is that people think we're talking down to them, and it just doesn't work. And I'd like to see us do a better job of trying to communicate. As I said earlier, maybe it doesn't get us a single vote, but I think it makes us more effective leaders if we develop an understanding of that.
And I think we need to do a better job with our education system. So I've started a new diversity commission. And listen, these people left Charlottesville, went back to work. You know, the gentleman who killed Heather Heyer, 32-year-old Heather Heyer, he was from Ohio. He weaponized his car and killed that woman. But I clearly understand that we have issues in Virginia, as every state does, and we, through a very tough history we've had in Virginia. So there's more that we need to do. But what I'm going to recommend for our schools, beginning in kindergarten through 12, we need to do a better job of having this conversation. We just have never done that before. How does a person get to the place where they literally will see the mayor of Charlottesville, who is Jewish, and scream at him he should have been incinerated? How do you get to that place in American society or anywhere? And I just think we need to do a better job early on. We need to begin to having discussions early on while these children are young. You wait till the later part of high school and college, it's way too late. We've got to start that discussion, and we are going to make that part of our core curriculum in Virginia.
That all sounds great. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Hello, my name is Mariana. I'm actually a first year and I'm a resident of Virginia. But growing up, I often felt like so many policies affected me, but I didn't have as much capacity to make a difference in the state. So how do you think we can, in general, help young people have greater influence on politics and issues that affect them?
Have you voted yet?
I did, yes.
Okay, cool. I was like, she doesn't get to ask a question if she hadn't voted yet. Okay, go ahead.
You want to start?
Yeah, and let me tell you, and I think every governor is facing this issue today of what you would call an aging state workforce. And we've got to encourage young people to come in. I think of the young people I have in the governor's office. I mean, you literally are drafting policy every single day. You really want to have an impact, actually, if you care about policy, come work in a state governor's office or in one of my departments or agencies. We're really trying to recruit, and we've all got to do a better job of doing it. But if you really want to make a difference, I mean, I have filled, as you can imagine, my governor's office with young, very bright, very energetic, very eager people who I constantly say, try new challenges. I'd rather have you try something new and fail than not try something new. And these young folks who I've had in my office have literally written policy and legislation that has transformed individuals' lives. So, you know, it doesn't have to be running for office. It really doesn't. I don't blame many of you if you don't want to run for office. I mean, with all the social media and all the stuff that goes on, this is one tough business, and you got to be pretty thick-skinned. But I'm just saying, if you really want to change people's lives, get yourselves, let it be. I always say the state government. I'm a big state government. I am so down, no offense, I am so down on Washington. As a governor, there is nothing getting done. I got no money for infrastructure. They've screwed up the health care. They haven't reauthorized the CHIP program. I've got it informed December 1st, 66,000 children that this Congress, who is worthless, is not going to be able to reauthorize CHIP. I mean, this is problematic. So that's my little 2 cents on Congress. But a lot of opportunity, I think, for you to work in a state government or a think tank. But boy, you can really make a difference, honestly.
Yeah, I'm actually pretty optimistic for folks like you who are coming out of school and looking at options. I mean, I think of the 10 to 15 young folks that worked in my administration that were in college or right out of college who are now, one's going to be heading the U.S. Conference of Mayors pretty soon. He's a mayor of Columbia, and there are a whole host of others who've been phenomenally successful starting out as interns in my office. And so that's a pretty significant work experience to have at a young age. But the governor's right. I mean, there is less, so many people want to go to Washington. There are so many great opportunities at the local and the state level to work and make a real impact, whether it's running for office or working in a nonprofit in a community. There are incredible service opportunities. And I think the fact that things are so difficult in Washington make the landscape at the state and local level so spectacular to do great things. I'd be very excited about it, and actually I'm really optimistic about a lot of the good things that are going on in communities across the country that are going to be emulated in other places, and you've got a great chance to be a part of that. I mean, we're too old to do that, but you've actually got a chance to be a part of that. And yeah, there you go. And see those things come to fruition.
And go work on a campaign.
Yeah.
Or
What a fun thing to do.
Run for office and work on your own campaign is my advice.
Hi, my name's Young. So regarding the recent violence over the planned removal of General Robert Lee's statue in Charlottesville, Virginia, some people applaud it as tearing down the symbol of hate, but still lots of critics, especially people outside the United States, saying that it's a destruction of historical heritage to extend similar in spirit to Cultural Revolution in China. So my question is, to what extent is it a balancing act amid all the noises? What should be the central debate in this national issue?
I'm for tearing them all down, but I'm black.
Tim?
I think minimally. I mean, realistically, in the South, the idea that they're all going to be torn down is not going to happen.
Yeah.
But you know what we can do? This gets back to starting where we can have greater understanding, is at least tell the complete story. I mean, we have this fantasized view of what the Civil War was all about that people still talk about in the South. Let's tell a complete story of some of the people that there are portraits of and monuments of. I mean, I get it when people say, this is about history, and next thing you're going to want to take Thomas Jefferson's statue down. But let's tell the whole story. And it seems to me that if we're looking for ways in which we can find common ground, we ought to do that. And we ought to at least take, in our state, there's a guy named Pitchfork Ben Tillman who, post-Reconstruction, is led to the greatest suppression of African-American voting rights of anyone, is how the hell we could have how we could have a portrait and name buildings for him and have statues of him up. I mean, God, we could at least agree on that. But I think that's the one place we could start if we're not going to be successful in removing these statutes, is at least be honest about it. And that's a discussion we have never been willing to have in the South, to have an honest discussion of what the war was all about and what it meant and the impact it had on all South Carolinians.
Yeah, and we've begun the process in Virginia. Just 2 days ago, Jeb Stewart's name was taken off one of the schools. I think they're going through the process of the schools is where they're starting to remove some of the names on the schools. Virginia, as I say, we were the capital of the Confederacy. We have a place called Monument Ave. It's about a couple miles long, right through downtown Richmond. That's got all these, it's got like a 3-story statue to Jefferson Davis and Stonewall Jackson, and we have them all there. It's interesting. A couple years ago, I ordered the removal of the Confederate flag from all state license plates. I could do that through executive authority. I have no power to take any statues down. But I asked the state historic resources, I said, I'd like to know about these statues. I got the report the other day. I think it's 168 or 186 statues in Virginia today. We have a lot of history in Virginia. George Washington born there, Thomas Jefferson. The War of 1812, there's one statue. World War I, one. World War II, 2 statues. The American Revolution, which started in Virginia with Patrick Henry's speech, ended in Virginia, the Battle of Yorktown. I think we have 3 statues and 1 to the Vietnam War, okay? 180 to the Civil War, and many of them, which is the important point, many of them were put up during the time of massive resistance. Had nothing to do with the Civil War. I remind you that the rebel flag was not part of the Civil War. That came in during massive resistance.
It's a war flag, too.
It's a war flag.
It's a war flag rather than the flag of the Confederacy.
So that kind of rebutes the theory that it's about heritage.
Yeah.
Great question.
But it's a great debate to have, and we should be having this debate. We ought to be able to have a civil discussion, as Jim just said, on the discussion of it.
Hi, my name is Andrew Corzo. I'm a 4th year in the college, born and raised Fairfax, Virginia for 18 years. This question is directed to you, Governor McAuliffe. If you look at a map of the election results for a Democratic gubernatorial primary in Virginia, you'd see that almost all counties in southwestern Virginia voted for Tom Perriello. These are the same counties that went for Bernie Sanders in 2016 and ultimately for Trump in the general election. Should conventional Democrats pivot further to the left to appeal to these larger, or these rural, largely poorer regions and counties in Virginia?
Yeah. And let me tell you, when I ran for governor, it was a hard deal. First of all, you know, when I ran in 09, most people didn't think I lived in the state of Virginia. As Karen, she wrote about the race back in 09. I lost that race in the primary.
Was that a bad article? That was kind of chilly. That was awkward, right? That was an awkward moment.
Karen was pretty good to me. But I mean, listen, fair is fair. I never have a gripe. It is what it is. I came back, worked hard, and won again. But, you know, I had a different model. What I just told you, what I ran on, which no one had ever run before. And, you know, I was considered what you would call a national. I was chairman of the Democratic National Committee. I had chaired Bill Clinton's campaign for president. I had chaired Hillary Clinton's. That is not the traditional model in Virginia of someone running for governor. I was able to get around all that because of jobs and so forth. So I had a very tough time, no question, in the rural communities. If you look at Virginia, today the traditional roadmap for success is you win Northern Virginia, Richmond, Hampton Roads. It's called the Crescent. And Ralph will have the same map. Tim Kaine had the same map. That will drive out, you know, you've got to get that. And you have a hard time in the rest of our state. You do okay in Blacksburg because Virginia Tech is there. You do okay in Charlottesville because of UVA. But literally, that's about it. And I'm just hoping, so I didn't get those votes. You know, as Bakari said, I got percentage-wise the same as President Obama. That was historic. I also think I got the least white men who've ever voted probably in that race.
Yeah, you got crushed in white women, too.
Yeah. But today, all I'm telling you is I've reduced unemployment in every single rural county in Virginia. I'm hoping that the actions I took and the things that we're able to do when I talk about renewable energy and replacing the coal jobs, textile, furniture, and tobacco, I'm hoping that will work. It may take some time. There is just a cultural barrier that we're going to take their guns away, that we're against coal, and it's just not right, but it's a cultural thing that may take some time. I'm not for taking anyone's gun away. If you are a legitimate, have the ability to go get it, but you ought to go through a background check. I've done it myself. It takes 5 minutes. Everybody ought to go through it. I mean, look what you go through to get the driver's license, everything else. We ought to do it to buy a firearm. We're the home of Virginia Tech. Until what just recently occurred, it was, you know, one of the worst tragedies in American history. So I go back to, it's the economic argument, and we're constantly making better progress. And I'm hoping that Ralph, because of all the jobs we've created, I've done more jobs announcements in the rural part of the state than I've done in the Crescent. I'm hoping that will help us. I'm hoping.
And one of the things they did, and kind of unbeknownst, you didn't even mention it, is a kind of a roadmap for the Democratic Party, because they actually brought Tom Perriello into the fold. And so one of the biggest spokespeople that you have for the ticket has been Tom Perriello.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can we just make sure the question is directed to one of the governors? We only have 17 minutes left. I want to make sure everybody gets a chance.
All right, then this is directed to Governor McAuliffe. You talked briefly about your success in restoring voting rights to thousands of ex-convicts in Virginia.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you could comment on what you think the future of fighting discrimination against ex-convicts is going to look like in the United States, especially considering that, at least in the DNC survey I got sent a few months ago, it had several dozen options for what should be the priorities for the Democratic Party and didn't mention criminal justice once.
Yeah. Well, I should mention the restoration of rights because I think at the end of the day, to kind of put that aside, what would have been my greatest accomplishment? You know, Virginia has a very tough, sordid history. 40 states, ladies and gentlemen, it's automatic you get your rights back. 40 states. In 2 states in America, Vermont and Maine, you can vote while you're in prison. 14 states, you vote the second you walk out. The remaining states, you're done with probation and parole. So Virginia, I mean, we could spend all day of the things I've tried to fix. A felony is $200 in Virginia. If you come to Virginia tomorrow and you steal an iPhone or a pair of Air Jordans, you are a felon in Virginia for $200. This has gone on for years. We're the worst state in America. I've tried to change it. I haven't been able to get that through my legislature. So we just had a lot of folks in Virginia who just should get their rights to vote back. So in 1902, a state senator by the name of Glass put this prohibition into our Constitution with a poll tax and a literacy test. What he said that day was, I am doing this to eliminate the darky from being a political factor in Virginia. That was his quote. Now, I was able to stand there 115 years later and say, new sheriff in town, buddy, and I was able to restore those rights. What happened? The Republicans sued me, took me to the Supreme Court. I lost the first round. They said I didn't have the authority, which I actually did. The gentleman who wrote the Constitution was my legal advisor, but understand the Supreme Court's affirmed by the plaintiffs, the Assembly. So they said, no, he has to do it individually. So I said, fine. Go get me the pens and give me all 206,000 petitions. I'll start signing them today. Well, they didn't like that. So what happened? They sued me again. I'm the first Virginia governor to be sued for contempt of court. This time, I won. And today, there are 170,000 people in Virginia who are going to be able to vote in this upcoming election. But forget about voting. They are no longer second-class citizens. People deserve second chances in life. You show me anyone in this audience who's never made a mistake, and I'll show you a liar. People make mistakes. So I think you ask the priorities of our party, this civil rights should be at the top of the list. I am so proud that as governor, I've reduced the juvenile detention facility. I've reduced it by 2/3. I've reformed it. You're in Virginia today in our correctional facilities. I get you a college education. I wish you could have been with me the other day. I was at Greensville Correctional Facility. I now offer college courses. You can get your driver's license while you're in. You can get your commercial driving license. 33 prisoners. I gave the commencement address in this prison. Place was jammed. Marching band comes in. Fouled came 33 prisoners, and we gave them their GEDs that day. How do you like that, folks? That's what we should be doing as Democrats.
Thank you.
Thank you both for coming to speak with us today. This question could really apply to either of you, so I guess you guys can kind of choose who to answer.
I'll let him answer. I've been talking a lot.
So the governorship is the most powerful executive office in a state. You're basically like a president. You have commander-in-chief authority over the National Guard. When it comes to disasters like hurricanes, life and death can sometimes be in your hand. So when you were entering this office, what kind of fears or reservations or concerns did you have about your readiness for the office, and how did those play out once you were actually the governor?
I was more worried about the person that was in the office before me and the one after me than I was about myself.
Well,
as you might
the one
guess.
after you, certainly.
Fears, I don't know about fears. Now, I served 11 years in the Assembly, so I felt like I knew the process pretty well, and I think the uncertainties of knowing if anything can happen in a day. And one of the things that I think, and I'd be interested in Governor McAuliffe's comments about these, but you go in with some ideas about things you want to do, and you believe you can control the agenda being governor. As you said, you're the most powerful political person in the state. But the truth is, there often are external events that take you off of your playbook and force you to respond. And I think the best governors are those that can, I mean, anybody can put a plan together and you try to execute on it, but the best governors, the best leaders are those that when knocked off their playbook and when they have external events beyond their control are able to manage through that and continue to lead the state forward. So I think that's it, is you plan for a lot of things, but there are all sorts of things that happen on a daily basis that can change the direction of what the public's thinking about and the things that you have to deal with as governor, and being flexible enough to handle that. And final comment on this. Political people are bad about doubling down on bad decisions. And one of the things I learned really early on is when you screw up, you're better off just admitting it and pivoting and moving on. Because people are fairly understanding about that. They may gripe for a while, but they respect you more if you will do that. And frankly, it does you no good. If you want to spend a month mired in a discussion about whether you did something right or you did something wrong, you're losing. You might as well put an end to that problem and move on to the next thing that you're handling. And I think that was an early lesson for me, is the importance of understanding when it was time to move on to something else. Because if you've made a mistake, the importance of fessing up on that, I think people appreciate that, and I think you're a better leader if you do that. Does that answer it?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lauren Tucker. I'm with Indivisible Chicago, and actually I worked on your campaign when I was teaching at the University of South Carolina.
Oh, great.
And I just recently moved from Virginia. I worked on your campaign when I was in Virginia.
Let's give her a round of
I
applause.
covered all the bases.
You're good luck. We like having you here.
Which campaign did she work on for you?
But I think, I'm missing the part, you raised, Jim, you raised the issue of working class whites. There are times in our country where we've seen politicians really be able to unify the working class, white, black, Latino, et cetera, and yet I'm not seeing those efforts. And yet there are times, even Jesse Jackson, remember when he ran for president, he was getting that kind of coalition together. What do we need to do to start getting that coalition back together? Because it's healthcare, it's jobs, it's housing, it's all kinds of things that really unify the working class, and yet I still see this division, and I'm thinking we could be doing a better job.
Well, I mean, I think that's one of the things that we can learn from the Sanders campaign. I guess I'm considered an establishment Democrat. I'm more moderate. But I think one of the great things about political parties in the U.S. is they've been pretty adaptive to changes. And one thing I think we do need to do is recognize and acknowledge the energy that Sanders voters and the Sanders campaign brought, and the focus on some issues that I think we need to embrace. Because there was more energy, and there was, particularly with working class voters, there was a feeling that he spoke more to them. And we need to get that message. So I think picking and choosing some of the issues that we think could be helpful to us and embracing those and trying to flesh them out a little bit more, that's one thing we could do. But I said this earlier, I really believe we've stopped talking to those voters. I mean, you were with us in '98 and '02, and there's some good reasons why we do more poorly with white voters in the South, and I acknowledge that. Some of it's race. Some of it's changes that have occurred in people that want it back the old way. But we've got to accept ownership that we could do a better job of communicating too. If we're going to be successful, I've talked about my region now since this is about the South, we're not going to be able to be successful with the current demographics unless we do better with some group of voters. And I would say and argue that it's more likely it's going to be some coalition of African-American voters, Latino voters, white college-educated voters, and some working-class voters. We've got to do that to be able to have a majority in the Deep South states. I mean, the numbers are different for Governor McAuliffe, but if we're going to be successful as a party in those areas, then we got to do that. And I happen to believe it's important for us to have a functional Democratic Party in those states, because I think it's good for the party and it's good for the country.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have time for 2 final questions.
Well, there's 3 there. Should we take it? What do you think?
He actually works here. He just looks at
Okay, great.
My name's Jake. I'm from Virginia, so thank you for coming out.
Where in Virginia?
Fairfax County, Vienna. I find it kind of funny that I went 1,000 miles away for college and I still get to meet you before my friends who went to UVA and VT and all those places. And so my question is for you. We've mentioned voter disenfranchisement a couple times today, and specifically I want to talk about gerrymandering. It's an issue that exists in lots of parts of the country. There's a lot of places that are gerrymandered for Republicans. There's places that are gerrymandered for Democrats as well. And to me, if someone's vote is purposely changed so it doesn't count, that's not really living in a democracy, so we need to fix that as quickly as possible. But is it naive to believe we can do that? Because a politician has no particular reason to fight against gerrymandering other than, morality and caring. So the question is, how do we fight for truly making our votes count and fighting against this institutionalized gerrymandering?
No, I think you've hit the fundamental question. I talk about this all the time. These gerrymandered districts have done the most damage to democracy in our country. Why is it that the Congress is so split today? They won't even talk to each side won't talk to each other. I have the same issue in my own legislative chamber in Virginia because, as I mentioned, on Medicaid expansion. So these lines are drawn to the point that they can't lose a general election. They can only lose a primary in their party. So it has pushed people to the extremes because they don't have to worry about the middle. They're not going to lose the general election. They got to win in the primaries. And so this effort that I'm doing with the president, Eric, and everybody else is we're trying to get all 50 states. I am all for a nonpartisan, independent commission to draw the lines in the country. And until we can get to that point, we've had about 5 or 6 states have already done that. California does it. The top 2 vote getters, regardless of party, go into the general election. We need to do that because if we don't do it, I'm just telling you, this country, we are at gridlock today. It is affecting our ability to govern. It's affecting our ability to be global leaders today because nothing is getting done. Look at the health care debate we just went through. You will see it in the tax debate that we just had here. So, and you're right, it's got to be done. So what did we do in Virginia? We actually sued. We sued on the congressional map. The court ruled in our favor. We actually picked up a new Democratic Congressman, Don McEachin, only because of a lawsuit. It's also been sued on my House of Delegates map, just went to the United States Supreme Court. We've just won 7-1. It's going to come back. They are now going to have to redraw those lines and run them again next year. So what we're trying to do through the national effort is to file suits for fair. I want lines that are 50-50. Competition is good. I've started dozens of companies. I've always had competition. I started my first business at 14. I had to, or else I wasn't going to college. I've been working like a dog as an entrepreneur. I love it. But competition keeps you strong. It keeps you on your game. It keeps you smart. And if you don't have to worry about re-election, then you know what? You're not as sharp as you ought to be. And we got to get back to the point where you have competition. You work for us, not vice versa. I mean, you work for the voters, and we got to get back to that in this country because that's not where we are today.
Thank you, Governor.
And it makes money so important. And we got to have competition for real races.
Thank you.
Thank
Go
you.
Ralph Northam.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ralph's winning the room.
Hi, I'm Ben. I'm also a first year in the college. So this is honestly for either of you, touching on the subject of primaries. Part of what we saw in 2010 with the ascension of the Tea Party is that one of the reasons they were able to become so powerful is by challenging establishment conservatives in the primaries and then winning because, like you said, all you have to do is win the primary. So my question kind of has 3 parts. Number 1, is there that kind of energy on the Democratic side that can seize on the kind of anger that we're seeing in response to Trump? Number 2, where geographically do you think that is? And then number 3, what can we learn from the more old guard conservatives who were able to resist that anger?
Well, I just tell you, in Virginia next week, I think you're going to see the biggest turnout we've ever seen. In our primaries several months ago, we had 200,000 more Democrats show up in our primaries than the Republicans. That has never happened before. And what it is, quite frankly, is that people are upset about what happened in the election last year, and they are coming out in record numbers. It is going to be, listen, I'm the ultimate optimist, and I got reporters here, but it is going to be a sweep, and it's going to be a great night. So I think there is that anxiety, and I think people who did not vote, I am tired of people coming up to me saying, Governor, I am so sorry I didn't vote last year. I didn't think it mattered. I didn't think my vote mattered. It drives me wow. They're all sitting home. well, how could we end up with this? Because you sat home. And I think for a lot of people, they realize they gotta get out and vote. And, you know, I think I think next week you're all gonna turn on TV Tuesday night, and the comeback for the Democratic Party starts in the great Commonwealth of Virginia.
Amen. I also think that Republicans had a lot of heartburn then, and they have a lot of heartburn now about 2010 because, you know, to push back on your question a little bit, Republicans weren't successful with those primaries. You had people like Todd Aiken. You had the woman who had to say, I'm not a witch. Nevada, you had a lot of opportunity that was squandered by the Republican Party due to their primaries. I think that we need to challenge everybody. Everybody needs to be ready. If you was a primary or general, I just don't think it was as successful as we think. But that question does kind of give us a good ending for tonight, because what the Democratic Party is doing is going through a lot of growing pains. I don't think a year ago, in fact, I'm absolutely certain a year ago, no one would have thought we'd be sitting in this room with President Donald J. Trump.
No.
I definitely didn't think we would be sitting here. But one of the experiences that I wanted to bring to the University of Chicago was showing that I love Barack Obama, but one of the things devastatingly to my heart he's shown the country is that you can get to 270 electoral votes without going through the South at all. And so I wanted to bring individuals who actually have won, who can show us how to rebuild the party, maybe in a part of the country that we haven't thought that much about, and maybe some of those lessons that Governor McAuliffe and Governor Hodges have lived and shown can help the Democratic Party grow into a new era. With that, I want to thank everybody for coming out, and don't forget we have some Run Terry Run 2020 bumper stickers out in the lobby out there. Grab some if you so choose.